The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Starfleet has catalogued thousands of species, mapped nebulae across parsecs, and even negotiated with omnipotent beings. But what happens when the transporter, a technology so reliable it's used billions of times across the Federation, brings something into existence that defies every biological database, every medical scan, every rational explanation? What happens when a soldier from another reality appears, carrying ideals forged in a war this universe has only read about in historical archives? On Deep Space Nine, in the third year of the Dominion War, the impossible walked out of a transporter beam. And nothing would ever be quite the same. The transporter pad hummed with the familiar whine of matter reconfiguration, but Chief Miles O'Brien's fingers flew across his console with unusual urgency. The pattern buffer was screaming warnings he'd never seen in 20 years of transporter operation. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax leaned over the sensor readouts, her trill spots creasing with concentration. "Miles, the molecular resolution is all wrong," Dax said, her voice carrying 7 lifetimes of scientific curiosity. "The pattern buffer is reading cellular structures that shouldn't exist: enhanced muscle density, reinforced skeletal composition, neural pathways operating at 40% above human baseline." "I'm getting that," O'Brien muttered, his hands dancing across the controls. "But the pattern is stable. Whatever's coming through, it's not fragmenting. It's just wrong. Like trying to fit a square peg into a quantum-level round hole." The transporter beam coalesced, golden light forming into a humanoid shape. When the glow faded, a man stood on the pad, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform unlike anything in Starfleet records. The suit was navy blue with red and white striping across the torso. White star emblazoned on the chest. But what caught O'Brien's attention wasn't the strange uniform. It was the shield strapped to the man's back, a circular disc of red, white, and blue that reflected the station's lights with an impossible sheen. The man's eyes snapped open, blue, clear, alert. Not the disorientation of a normal transport. Combat awareness. O'Brien had served in the Cardassian War. He recognized a soldier's stance when he saw one. "Where am I?" The man's voice was firm, commanding. His hand moved to his hip instinctively, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. His gaze swept the transporter room, cataloging exits, threats, tactical positions. All in 2 seconds. "Easy there," O'Brien said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "You're aboard Deep Space Nine, a Federation starbase in the Bajoran sector. I'm Chief O'Brien. This is Lieutenant Commander Dax. You just came through our transporter, but," he glanced at Dax. "We weren't expecting anyone." The man's expression didn't soften. "Federation? I don't know what that is. Last thing I remember, I was in New York. There was an energy surge, felt like the Tesseract, but different. Then everything went white." Dax stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, then seemed to decide that information wasn't classified. "Steve Rogers. Captain, United States Army." He paused. "What year is this?" "Stardate 51721.3, Dax said automatically, then translated. "Earth calendar year 2374. But I don't think you're asking about when. I think you're asking where." Roger's jaw tightened. "You're telling me I'm not on Earth?" "Oh, you're definitely human," Dax said, her eyes on the tricorder in her hand. "But your cellular structure is unlike anything in our medical database. Your body is producing enhanced proteins, your immune system is operating at levels that would be considered superhuman, and your metabolism," she looked up. "What are you?" "Or." Something shifted in Roger's expression. "Recognition. Understanding. Then I need to speak with your commanding officer. If I've been pulled into your conflict, I need to know what I'm dealing with." He glanced down at his uniform, then back up. "And I need to know how to get home." O'Brien tapped his comm badge. O'Brien to Ops. We've got a situation in Transporter Room 2. You're going to want to see this. Captain Benjamin Sisko's voice came through, steady and authoritative. On my way, Chief. Security to Transporter Room 2. Roger's posture shifted slightly, not aggressive, but ready. Security. So I'm a prisoner. You're an unknown, Dax said diplomatically. We're in the middle of a war with an enemy that uses shapeshifters as infiltrators. Standard protocol for anyone who appears unexpectedly. No offense intended. None taken, Roger said. I'd do the same thing. He unstrapped the shield from his back with practiced ease, holding it in one hand. The disc caught the light, its surface unmarred despite looking well used. But I'm not your enemy. And I'm not anyone's weapon. The doors hissed open. Captain Benjamin Sisko strode in, flanked by 2 security officers with phaser rifles. Sisko was a man who carried command in his bearing, bald head, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that filled a room. He stopped 3 meters from the transporter pad, his gaze assessing Rogers with the same tactical awareness Rogers had shown moments before. 2 soldiers, recognizing each other. I'm Captain Benjamin Sisko, commanding officer of Deep Space Nine. His voice was measured, controlled. Chief O'Brien tells me you appeared in our transporter without being beamed aboard. That's impossible. So is a lot of what I've seen in my life, Rogers replied. He lowered the shield slightly, a gesture of non-aggression. Captain Rogers. And I'm just as confused as you are. Sisko's eyebrow raised. Captain. What branch? United States Army. Second World War. Rogers watched Sisko's expression carefully. You don't know what that is. I know Earth history, Sisko said. World War II ended in 1945. Which makes you either a very old man, a very good liar, or something I don't have a classification for yet. All 3, depending on how you look at it, Rogers said. There was no humor in his tone. I've been a lot of things. Right now, I'm someone who needs answers. Chief O'Brien mentioned a war. What kind of war? Sisko studied him for a long moment. Then he made a decision. Stand down, he told his security team. They didn't lower their weapons, but they relaxed fractionally. Commander Dax, full medical and biological scan. I want to know everything about our guest. He turned back to Rogers. As for your questions, walk with me. If you're really who you say you are, then you'll understand why I'm cautious. And why I need to know if you're a threat. Rogers nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Captain, he met Sisko's eyes directly. I've spent my entire life fighting for people's freedom. I don't take sides in wars I don't understand. So before you tell me about your enemy, tell me about yourself. Tell me if your Federation is worth defending. Sisko's expression was unreadable. That's exactly what I intend to do. The 2 captains walked toward the door, Rogers carrying his shield, Sisko with his hands clasped behind his back. Behind them, Dax whispered to O'Brien. Did he just demand that Benjamin Sisko justify the Federation? O'Brien grinned despite himself. I like him already. The doors closed, leaving the transporter room humming with residual quantum displacement. The sensors continued logging data about the impossible pattern that had materialized on the pad, data that would take weeks to fully analyze. Somewhere in the station's vast computer network, a subroutine flagged the arrival for Section 31's attention. On the promenade, the station's commercial and social hub, life continued as normal. Quark's bar rang with laughter and the clatter of Dabo wheels. Bajorans knelt in prayer before the temple. Starfleet officers hurried to their posts. No one yet knew that a man from another universe had arrived. But in Ops, as Sisko and Rogers emerged from the turbolift, Major Kira Nerys looked up from her console and froze. She'd been a resistance fighter against the Cardassians, had seen soldiers of every stripe. The man walking beside Cisco moved like a fighter, not the trained precision of Starfleet, but something older. Something forged in different fires. "Captain," she said carefully. "Who's this?" Cisco glanced at Rogers. "That's an excellent question, Major. One I intend to answer." Steve Rogers stood in the center of ops, surrounded by consoles displaying star charts, tactical readouts, and sensor data he couldn't begin to interpret. Through the massive windows, he could see the vastness of space, stars beyond counting, and something else. A swirling vortex of light and energy, beautiful and impossible. "What is that?" he asked, pointing. "The Bajoran wormhole," Cisco said. "A stable passage to the Gamma Quadrant, 70,000 light-years away. It's also the reason we're at war." Rogers turned back to face him. "Then you'd better tell me about it. Because Captain, if I'm stuck here, I need to know what I'm fighting for." "First," Cisco said, "you need to understand what you've walked into." "Welcome to Deep Space Nine, Captain Rogers. And welcome to the Dominion War. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper." The briefing room was stark and functional, a table, chairs, and a wall-mounted display screen. Steve Rogers sat across from Captain Sisko, Major Kira standing to Sisko's left, arms crossed. Through the viewport, the wormhole pulsed with ethereal light, opening and closing like the eye of some cosmic entity. Rogers had seen strange things, alien invasions, gods, magic, but there was something humbling about staring at a tunnel through space itself. Cisco activated the display. A star map materialized, sections highlighted in different colors. "This is the Alpha Quadrant," he began. "Home to the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, and dozens of other powers. For 200 years, we've explored, established diplomatic relations, and yes, fought wars. But nothing prepared us for the Dominion." The map shifted, focusing on the wormhole and the space beyond. 3 years ago, we made contact with a power from the Gamma Quadrant. The Dominion, an empire spanning thousands of worlds, ruled by shapeshifters called the Founders. They believe order can only be maintained through absolute control. They use genetically engineered soldiers called the Jem'Hadar and cloned administrators called the Vorta. They don't negotiate. They conquer. Rogers leaned forward, studying the tactical display. The strategic positions, the supply lines, the contested territories, it was familiar territory, even if the scale was incomprehensible. Shapeshifters. Your chief mentioned infiltrators. The Founders can assume any form, Kira said, her voice hard. Anyone in this room could be one of them. We've developed blood screening protocols, but they've adapted. Paranoia is as much a weapon for them as their fleets. Psychological warfare, Rogers said. Break trust, divide your enemy from within. The Nazis used informants and collaborators the same way. He looked at Cisco. How long has this war been going? 2 years of open conflict, Cisco replied. But the Dominion has been maneuvering for longer. They've allied with the Cardassian Union, a former enemy of the Federation who occupied Bajorans for 50 years. Together, they've conquered dozens of systems. Billions of casualties. And we're losing ground. Rogers absorbed this, his expression grave. You said you're explorers and peacekeepers. But this is total war. Yes. Sisko's voice carried the weight of every decision he'd made, every compromise he'd accepted. When you're fighting for survival, Captain Rogers, you do things you never thought you would. You make alliances with former enemies. You sacrifice principles for strategic advantage. You send people to die knowing some missions are hopeless. He paused. You become something other than what you started as. There was something in Sisko's tone, a recognition of cost. Rogers had heard it before, in the voices of men who'd seen too much. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself as much as me. Kira shot Sisko a glance, but he didn't flinch. I've made decisions that haunt me. Command in wartime requires it. The question isn't whether you'll compromise your ideals, it's how much you'll compromise before you become the enemy you're fighting. Rogers sat back, processing. In his time, the line had seemed clearer. The Axis powers were aggressors, totalitarian regimes bent on domination. The Allies fought for freedom, for democracy, for the right of people to determine their own futures. But even then, he'd seen the gray areas, the internment camps, the firebombing of cities, the atomic weapons that ended the war but incinerated hundreds of thousands. Tell me about the Federation, Rogers said finally. What are you fighting for? Sisko's expression softened slightly. The United Federation of Planets is an alliance of over 150 worlds. We're dedicated to peaceful exploration, scientific advancement, and mutual cooperation. Our founding principle is that infinite diversity and infinite combinations makes us stronger. Humans, Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, species that were once enemies, now working together. We don't have a caste system, Kira added. No slavery, no conquered peoples. Member worlds join voluntarily and retain their sovereignty. The Federation isn't perfect, but it's the closest thing to true equality this galaxy has ever seen. And yet you're at war, Rogers observed. Because the Dominion won't accept our existence, Sisko said. They see our diversity as chaos, our freedom as weakness. To them, we're an aberration that must be corrected. This isn't a war over resources or territory. It's a war over the fundamental question of how sentient beings should live. Rogers recognized the stakes. It was the same war he'd fought, authoritarianism versus liberty, control versus choice. The uniforms and weapons were different, but the principles were identical. What do you need from me? First, I need to understand what you are, Sisko said bluntly. Dr. Bashir is our chief medical officer. He'll want to run tests, understand your physiology. Commander Dax's scans showed cellular enhancements that shouldn't be possible. Before I can trust you, I need to know you're not a Dominion trick. Fair enough, Rogers said. He'd been poked and prodded by enough scientists to know the routine. But I'll tell you now, I was enhanced by a serum developed in 1943. It's called the Super Soldier Serum. It pushed my body to the peak of human potential and beyond. Strength, speed, healing, reflexes, all enhanced. But I'm still human. Still vulnerable. And the shield? Kira asked, nodding toward where it leaned against the wall. Rogers glanced at it. Vibranium. Rarest metal on Earth. It absorbs kinetic energy, making it virtually indestructible. It saved my life more times than I can count. Sisko exchanged a look with Kira. We'll want to analyze it. If we could replicate that technology. No, Rogers' voice was firm. The shield is mine. I don't know your Federation yet, Captain. I don't know if you're who you say you are. In my experience, governments that promise freedom sometimes deliver tyranny. I've seen it firsthand. The temperature in the room dropped. Kira's hand moved closer to her phaser. Sisko's expression hardened. That's not how this works, Captain Rogers. You appeared on my station without authorization during a war with an enemy that uses infiltration as a primary tactic. I'm extending you courtesy because I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But if you want to stay here as anything other than a prisoner, you'll cooperate. Rogers met his gaze without flinching. I've been a prisoner before. I've been hunted, detained, and told to stand down by people who didn't like that I asked questions. So here's what I'll do, I'll cooperate with your medical examination. I'll answer your questions honestly. But I won't hand over my equipment, and I won't take orders until I'm convinced your cause is just. You're in no position to make demands, Kira said sharply. Maybe not, Rogers agreed. But I'm also not your enemy. If your Federation is what you say it is, you'll understand why I need proof. If it's not, well, then you were going to lock me up anyway. Sisko studied him for a long moment. Outside, a Starfleet runabout streaked past the station, heading for the wormhole. Somewhere on the front lines, ships were fighting and dying. The war didn't stop for philosophical debates. You're right, Sisko said finally. I would be suspicious too. So here's my offer, you submit to the medical exam. You stay in quarters under light security. And I'll show you what the Federation is. You can walk the station, talk to the crew, see for yourself. But if at any point I believe you're a threat, this conversation ends and you go in a holding cell. Agreed? Rogers considered. It was more than he'd expected. Agreed. But I have one condition, I want to see the war. Not briefings and tactical displays. I want to see what you're actually fighting for. That can be arranged, Sisko said. Major, take Captain Rogers to the infirmary. And assign him quarters in the habitat ring. Security detail, but discreet. Kira nodded, still wary. This way, Captain. Rogers stood, retrieving his shield. As he followed Kira to the door, Sisko spoke again. Captain Rogers, I meant what I said. Command in wartime changes you. But it doesn't have to destroy you. I hope you'll see that we're trying to hold on to our principles, even when it's difficult. Rogers paused. In my experience, Captain, the difficult times are when principles matter most. I'll see if yours hold up. The infirmary was a sterile environment of biobeds and medical equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. Dr. Julian Bashir was young, dark-haired, with an eager intensity that reminded Rogers of some of the scientists who'd worked on Project Rebirth. He circled Rogers like a kid in a candy store, tricorder in hand, eyes wide with fascination. Remarkable, Bashir murmured, studying the readings. Your cellular regeneration is operating at nearly 300% of baseline human efficiency. Your muscle tissue has been restructured at the molecular level, denser, more resilient. And your nervous system, he looked up. Captain, you should be able to process sensory information and react faster than any unenhanced human. Have you noticed increased reaction times? I can dodge bullets if I see them coming, Rogers said dryly. Does that count? Bashir blinked. That's, theoretically impossible for a human. The neural processing speed required alone would, he trailed off, recalibrating his tricorder. This serum you mentioned, do you know its composition? Dr. Abraham Erskine developed it, Rogers said. But he was killed before he could reproduce it. I'm the only successful subject. There were others, but, he remembered the failures, the deaths. It doesn't work on everyone. Fascinating. Bashir moved to a console, pulling up a cellular analysis. The genetic modifications are stable, integrated into your DNA. It's not cybernetic or chemical supplementation, it's biological enhancement at the fundamental level. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were a different species. I'm human, Rogers said firmly. Enhanced, but human. I bleed. I can be hurt. I just heal faster and hit harder. Bashir nodded, making notes. I'll need to run a full genetic analysis, compare your DNA to baseline human templates. But preliminary results suggest you're telling the truth, you're not a shapeshifter, not a hologram, not any kind of Dominion trick. You're just, extraordinary. Kira, who'd been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. Doctor, is he a security risk? Medically? No more than any Starfleet security officer, Bashir said. In fact, his enhanced physiology might make him ideal for combat situations. Though I'd want to monitor his recovery rates, understand his limitations. I'm not a lab rat, Rogers interrupted. And I'm not a weapon you can point at your enemies. No one's suggesting that, Bashir said quickly. But if you're going to be on this station during a war, it helps to know what you're capable of. For your safety as much as ours. Rogers relented slightly. The doctor seemed genuine, if overly enthusiastic. Fine. But I want copies of all your findings. I've had people study me before. I like to know what they're learning. Of course, Bashir agreed. He glanced at Kira. He's cleared medically, Major. Not a shapeshifter, not a biological weapon. Just a very enhanced human from somewhere else. Kira tapped her comm badge. Kira to Cisco. Dr. Bashir confirms Rogers is human. No Dominion connection detected. Cisco's voice crackled back. Understood. Proceed with quarters assignment. And Major, keep an eye on him. I want to believe him, but trust takes time. Acknowledged. Kira gestured to Rogers. Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying. As they walked through the corridors of Deep Space Nine, Rogers took in his surroundings. The station was a mix of Starfleet efficiency and something older, Cardassian architecture, stark and industrial. Crew members passed by, some human, others distinctly alien. He saw a being with ridged forehead, others with spotted skin, one with what looked like a breathing apparatus. Your Federation really is diverse, he observed. That's the point, Kira said. Though it wasn't always easy. Bajorans, my homeworld, was occupied by the Cardassians for 50 years. They enslaved us, stripped our resources, treated us like animals. The Federation helped liberate us, but we're not members. We're affiliated. Why not join? Because we're still healing, Kira said quietly. Still figuring out who we are after decades of oppression. The Federation respects that. They don't force membership. They wait until you're ready. Rogers heard the pain in her voice. You were part of the resistance. For 15 years, Kira confirmed. I did things I'm not proud of. Killed people. Destroyed property. The Cardassians called us terrorists. We called ourselves freedom fighters. She glanced at him. I imagine you understand the difference. I do, Rogers said. I worked with resistance movements across Europe. Good people fighting impossible odds. Sometimes the line between soldier and terrorist comes down to who's writing the history. They reached a door marked with guest quarters designation. Kira activated the panel. This is you. Replicator for food and supplies, computer access, though some files will be restricted. Security will be outside, but they're not here to guard you. They're here to make sure you don't wander into sensitive areas. Rogers stepped inside. The quarters were small but functional, bed, desk, viewport showing the stars. It reminded him of barracks, though considerably more advanced. Thank you, Major. Kira hesitated at the door. Captain Sisko is a good man. One of the best I've served with. But this war has tested all of us. Whatever you're looking for, proof that we're worth fighting for, you'll find complications. We're not perfect. But we're trying. That's all I can ask, Rogers said. When she left, Rogers stood at the viewport, staring out at the alien stars. Somewhere out there, Earth existed, but not his Earth. Not his time. He was stranded in a future he didn't understand, in a war that wasn't his. But it might become his. Because if the Federation truly stood for freedom, for the right of people to choose their own path, then it was a cause worth fighting for. And if it didn't, he'd find that out too. Steve Rogers spent his first full day on Deep Space Nine observing. He'd learned long ago that you could tell more about an organization by watching its people than by listening to its leaders. Speeches were easy. Actions revealed truth. He started on the promenade, the station's main commercial and social hub. The space was vast, curved, with shops and businesses lining both levels. A Ferengi bartender, short, large-eared, sharp-eyed, haggled with customers over drinks. Bajorans in simple robes knelt before a temple entrance, praying to beings they called the prophets. Starfleet officers mixed with civilians, traders, and species Rogers couldn't begin to identify. No one saluted. No rigid hierarchy on display. People laughed, argued, conducted business. It felt organic in a way military bases never did. "First time seeing a Ferengi?" a voice asked. Rogers turned. A young man in civilian clothes stood beside him, Captain Sisko's son, he realized, recognizing the family resemblance. "Jake Sisko," the kid said, extending a hand. "Figured I'd play unofficial tour guide before someone official gives you the sanitized version." Rogers shook his hand. "Your father know you're here?" "He suggested it, actually," Jake said with a grin. "Said you wanted to see what the Federation really is. Hard to do that from briefing rooms." He gestured around the promenade. "So here it is, controlled chaos. The Ferengi run most of the businesses. The Bajorans run the temple. And Starfleet tries to keep everything from falling apart." They walked past Quark's bar, where the sound of gambling and conversation spilled out. Inside, Rogers glimpsed the Ferengi bartender counting currency while simultaneously managing 3 different tables. "Quark's a profiteer," Jake explained. "Smuggler, information broker, occasionally helpful when it suits him. Dad could shut him down, but he doesn't." "Know why?" "Because he's useful," Rogers said. "Intelligence flows through places like that." "Exactly." Jake looked impressed. "That's what drives some Starfleet officers crazy about this place. We work with people who aren't perfect. We make deals with Klingon who solve problems with violence. We tolerate Ferengi greed. We ally with Romulans who'd stab us in the back if it served their interests." "And that bothers you?" Rogers asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. I'm writing about the war, trying to document what's really happening. And the truth is messy. We've done things that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago." He paused. "My dad poisoned a planet. Cardassian colony. Made it uninhabitable to force a Maquis terrorist to surrender. It worked, but the cost," Rogers finished quietly. He'd seen good people make terrible choices in wartime. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "The Maquis leader was using biogenic weapons. He would have killed millions. Dad stopped him. But," he looked at Rogers. "Is that what war does? Turns good people into something else?" "Sometimes," Rogers said honestly. "But I've also seen people hold on to their principles even when it cost them everything. The question isn't whether you'll face impossible choices. It's whether you'll remember why you're fighting." They continued walking. Rogers noticed a security officer, the shapeshifter, Odo, observing the promenade from an elevated position. His expression was stern, vigilant, missing nothing. "That's Odo," Jake said. "Chief of Security. He's a changeling, same species as the founders who rule the Dominion. But he's not like them. He believes in justice, order. The founders want control. Odo just wants to prevent crime." "Must be complicated for him," Rogers observed. "You have no idea," Jake said. "Some people don't trust him. Think he might be a spy. But Dad trusts him completely. Says Odo's the most principled being he's ever met." An alarm suddenly blared. Red alert klaxons echoed through the promenade. People scattered, heading for designated shelters. Starfleet personnel sprinted toward their stations. "Dominion attack?" Rogers asked, his body tensing. "Come on," Jake said, already moving. "Ops." They ran through corridors, dodging personnel. Rogers moved with fluid efficiency, his enhanced physiology letting him navigate the chaos without breaking stride. By the time they reached Ops, the situation was clear. 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships decloaking, Kira reported. Bearing directly for the station. Cisco stood at the command center. Shields up. Hail them. The view screen activated. A Jem'Hadar soldier stood before them, reptilian features, armored hide, eyes that held no mercy. I am First Escort IKA. We seek the human anomaly detected on your station. Surrender him, or we will take him by force. Rogers stepped forward. You're talking about me. Cisco shot him a look. The Dominion has no authority here. Stand down or face the consequences. The anomaly disrupts the natural order, Escort IKA said. The Founders demand his immediate transfer. Captain Rogers is under Federation protection, Cisco said evenly. Attacking this station would be an act of war. We are already at war, Escort IKA replied. And we do not negotiate. The view screen went dark. They're charging weapons, Dax called out. Return fire, Cisco ordered. Disable, don't destroy. The station shuddered as phaser arrays opened fire. Through the viewport, Rogers watched energy beams impact the Jem'Hadar ship's shields. The attackers returned fire with purple-hued beams that phased through space. Rogers moved beside Cisco, watching the tactical display. They're not trying to destroy the station. They're trying to disable it. Board it. Cisco glanced at him. You read tactics? I led a unit behind enemy lines for 3 years. These are boarding tactics. He's right, Dax confirmed. They're targeting shield generators and transporter inhibitors. Rogers made a decision. Let me go out there. Give them a target away from the station. Absolutely not, Cisco cut him off. You'd be killed in seconds. Your people aren't dying because of me, Rogers insisted. This is my station, Cisco said firmly. My crew. My responsibility. He turned to his officers. Fire quantum torpedoes. Full spread. Target the lead ship's engines. Firing, Dax said. Brilliant points of light streaked toward the Jem'Hadar vessels. The lead ship's shields collapsed. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull. Their engines are disabled, Kira reported. The other 2 ships broke off, moving to flank their damaged companion. Then they retreated, vanishing into warp. They're leaving, Dax said, surprised. They got their answer, Cisco said. He turned to Rogers. Next time you want to play hero, clear it with me first. This is my station. Rogers met his gaze. Those soldiers came here because of me. And we defended you, Cisco said. Which means we need to figure out why the Dominion wants you so badly. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You asked to see what we're fighting against. The Jem'Hadar don't negotiate. They're bred for combat, addicted to a drug that keeps them loyal. They'll fight until they die without hesitation. Soldiers with no choice, Rogers said quietly. That's slavery. Welcome to the Dominion, Kira said. The Founders create life just to control it. That's the order they want to impose on the entire galaxy. Rogers looked out at the stars. He'd fought fascists before, regimes that saw people as resources. The ideology was the same, just wearing a different face. Captain Sisko, he said. I'm not ready to join your war. Not yet. But I am ready to learn more. Cisco nodded. That's all I'm asking. Keep your eyes open. And when you're ready to decide, I'll respect whatever choice you make. Rogers extended his hand. Cisco shook it, 2 soldiers finding common ground. Outside, the disabled Jem'Hadar ship drifted, leaking plasma. Its crew was dying, their drug supply cut off. In 14 hours, they would be dead. The Dominion would not return for them. Rogers didn't know that yet. But he would learn. 2 days after the Jem'Hadar attack, Captain Sisko made good on his promise. Rogers stood in the briefing room alongside Major Kira, Lieutenant Commander Worf, a Klingon tactical officer with a warrior's bearing, and Chief O'Brien. On the table between them lay a mission briefing PADD. The USS Defiant departs in 2 hours, Cisco said. We've received reports of a Dominion convoy passing through the Calandra sector, supplies, weaponry, possibly troop transports heading for the front lines. Starfleet Command wants reconnaissance, and if possible, interdiction. Interdiction, Rogers repeated. You mean attack? If the opportunity presents itself, Cisco confirmed. The Defiant is a warship, Captain Rogers. She was designed specifically to fight the Borg, but she's proven effective against the Dominion. Fast, heavily armed, and equipped with a cloaking device. Rogers raised an eyebrow. I thought cloaking was Romulan technology. It is, Worf said, his deep voice carrying a note of distaste. The Romulans loaned us the technology in exchange for intelligence sharing. It is, an arrangement of convenience. Politics, Kira said with a slight smile. The Romulans stayed neutral for the first year of the war. Now they're allies, sort of. They hate the Dominion more than they distrust us, so we work together. Rogers processed this. Strange bedfellows, forged by necessity. He'd worked with the Soviets against the Nazis, so he understood the principle. And you want me along for this mission? I want you to see what we're up against, Cisco said. Not from sensor readings or tactical reports. I want you to see Jem'Hadar soldiers in combat. See how they fight, how they think, or don't think. Then you can make an informed decision about where you stand. You're that confident I'll side with you? Rogers asked. Cisco met his gaze evenly. I'm confident that once you see what the Dominion does to people, you'll understand why we fight. Whether you join us or not, that's still your choice. Rogers considered. He'd been on DS9 for 3 days, watching, listening, asking questions. What he'd seen was complicated, compromises, moral gray areas, decisions that would haunt the people who made them. But underneath it all, he'd sensed something genuine. These people believed in what they were doing, even when it cost them. All right, Rogers said. I'll observe. But I'm not Starfleet. I don't take orders. You're an observer, Cisco agreed. But on my ship, you follow my commands. If I tell you to stay back, you stay back. If I tell you to move, you move. Combat situations don't allow for debate. Understood? It was a reasonable demand. Rogers had commanded enough missions to know you couldn't have people freelancing in the middle of a firefight. Understood. But if your people are in danger, I'm not standing by. Fair enough, Cisco said. He turned to Worf. Prepare the Defiant for departure. Standard combat loadout, full complement of quantum torpedoes. And Mr. Worf, let's try to bring everyone home this time. Worf's expression was stoic. I will endeavor to do so, Captain. The USS Defiant was unlike any starship Rogers had seen in the station's docking bay. Where other Federation vessels were sleek and exploratory in design, the Defiant was compact, angular, built for war. She bristled with phaser arrays and torpedo launchers. Even docked, she looked dangerous. Beautiful, isn't she? O'Brien said, following Rogers' gaze. Tough little ship. Taken more punishment than vessels twice her size and kept fighting. They boarded through the airlock. The interior was cramped, no wasted space, every meter dedicated to systems or weapons. The bridge was small, stations arranged around a central command chair. It felt more like a submarine than a starship. Cisco took the command chair. Stations, everyone. Mr. Worf, release docking clamps. Helm, set course for the Calandra sector, warp 6. Aye, Captain, came the responses. The Defiant detached from DS9, her impulse engines firing as she cleared the docking ring. Then space seemed to stretch, stars elongating into streaks of light as the ship jumped to warp speed. Rogers stood at the back of the bridge, out of the way, watching the crew work. There was an efficiency to their movements, a trust built through shared experience. Cisco commanded with quiet authority. Worf monitored tactical systems with intense focus. Dax piloted with casual expertise, her hands dancing across the helm controls. "Captain Rogers," Dax called back. "You're welcome to come forward. Better view up here." Rogers moved to stand between Cisco's command chair and Dax's helm. Through the view screen, space streaked past at impossible speeds. "How fast are we going?" "Warp 6, Dax said. "About 392 times the speed of light. We'll reach the Calandra sector in 4 hours. Rogers shook his head slightly. "In my time, breaking the sound barrier was considered impossible. Now you're traveling faster than light like it's nothing." "Warp drive changed everything," Cisco said. "It allowed humanity to reach the stars, make first contact with alien species, join the larger galactic community. Without it, we'd still be confined to our solar system. And you'd never have met the Dominion," Rogers observed. "True," Cisco acknowledged. "But we'd also never have met the Vulcans. The Andorians discovered worlds and civilizations beyond imagining. Exploration has risks. But the alternative is stagnation." Rogers thought about that. In his time, isolationism had been a powerful force, America First movements, nations closing their borders. But isolation hadn't stopped the war. It had only delayed the inevitable. "I understand the principle. But exploration becomes conquest if you're not careful. The Prime Directive is supposed to prevent that," Dax said. "Starfleet's most sacred rule, no interference with pre-warp civilizations. We observe, we study, but we don't make contact until a species develops warp capability on their own. It's meant to protect less advanced cultures from contamination." "Does it work?" Rogers asked. Dax and Cisco exchanged glances. "Sometimes," Dax said carefully. "Other times, circumstances force violations. The directive is absolute, but reality is complicated. Like when people are suffering and you have the power to help," Rogers said. "But the rules say you can't interfere." "Exactly," Cisco said quietly. "I've faced that choice more than once. Sometimes I've followed the directive. Sometimes I haven't. The weight of those decisions doesn't get lighter with time." Worf's console beeped. "Captain, approaching the Calandra sector. Sensors detect multiple warp signatures ahead. Consistent with Dominion convoy profiles. Go to yellow alert," Cisco ordered. "Engage cloaking device. Let's take a look before we commit." The bridge lights dimmed to amber. A faint shimmer passed through the ship as the cloaking device activated. On the view screen, the starfield wavered slightly, then stabilized. "Cloak engaged," Worf confirmed. "We are undetectable." "Drop to impulse," Cisco said. "Close to sensor range slowly. I want to know what we're dealing with." The Defiant slowed, creeping through space on minimal power. Through the view screen, shapes began to resolve. 3 large transport vessels surrounded by 6 Jem'Hadar attack ships, moving in formation toward Dominion space. "Scanning," Worf reported. "Transports are carrying military supplies, weapons, shield generators, and," he paused, his expression darkening. "Biosignatures. Approximately 3,000 lifeforms. Humanoid. Prisoners," Kira said, her voice tight with anger. "They're transporting prisoners." Cisco leaned forward. "Can you identify species?" "Mixture," Worf said. "Human, Balian, Terrian. Federation citizens. Likely captured during recent engagements." Rogers felt his jaw tighten. "Prisoners of war, being transported to who knew where. Labor camps. Interrogation facilities. Or simply execution. He'd seen it before, the Nazis had perfected the machinery of human disposal. "What do you do?" he asked quietly. "Our orders are reconnaissance," Cisco said. "Gather intelligence, report back to Starfleet Command. Your orders are to let them take 3,000 prisoners." Roger's voice was controlled, but the edge was unmistakable. "Our orders are to avoid engagement unless tactically advantageous," Cisco corrected. "The Defiant is one ship. That convoy has 6 escorts and likely more firepower than we can handle alone. An attack could result in the destruction of the transports, and everyone aboard. So you do nothing." "So we gather intelligence," Cisco said firmly. "We track their course, identify their destination, and coordinate a rescue operation with proper fleet support. Rushing in gets people killed, Captain Rogers. Including the prisoners we're trying to save." Rogers wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to do something. But Cisco's logic was sound. He'd made similar calls during the war, holding back when everything in him demanded action because the timing wasn't right, because rushing in meant failure. "How long before they reach their destination?" Rogers asked. "At current speed, 18 hours, Dax calculated." "And how long to coordinate a fleet rescue?" Cisco was silent for a moment. "At least 24 hours. Maybe longer." "So those prisoners are lost," Rogers said flatly. "Not lost," Kira said. "But we can't save everyone. Not every time. If we try and fail, we're not just losing them, we're losing the Defiant, her crew, and any future operations we might conduct. It's brutal math, but it's the reality of war." Rogers looked at the view screen, at the convoy moving inexorably toward Dominion space. 3,000 people. 3,000 lives that could end in labor camps or worse. "I've heard that justification before," he said quietly. "We can't save everyone, so we focus on the battles we can win. But every time you make that choice, you're deciding who lives and who dies. Someone has to speak for the people you're leaving behind. You think I don't know that?" Cisco's voice was sharp. "You think I sleep well at night knowing I'm making these calculations? Every prisoner we don't rescue, every colony we evacuate too late, every ship that gets destroyed while we're somewhere else, I carry that, Captain Rogers. We all do. But if I throw this ship away on a mission we can't win, then I'm not saving anyone. I'm just adding to the casualty list." The bridge was silent. Even the soft beeping of consoles seemed muted. Rogers took a slow breath. Cisco was right, tactically, strategically, right. But that didn't make it easier. What if there was a way? "A way to what?" Cisco asked. "To save them. Not a frontal assault. Something else." Worf spoke up. "The convoy's formation is defensive but predictable. If we could disable their communications array and target their escort vessels simultaneously, we'd still be outnumbered 6-1, Cisco interrupted. And the moment we decloak, every ship in that convoy opens fire. Not if they're focused on something else, Rogers said. He moved to the tactical display, studying the convoy's configuration. Your cloaking device, can you cloak a smaller craft? A shuttle? Yes, Dax said slowly, catching on. If we deployed a cloaked shuttle, it could approach the transports while we engage the escorts. Exactly, Rogers said. You draw their fire. I take the shuttle, board one of the transports, and disable it from inside. Create enough chaos that the convoy has to split its attention. That's insane, O'Brien said. Even if you got aboard, you'd be facing Jem'Hadar soldiers, automated defenses, and whatever else they've got. One man against an entire ship. Rogers met his eyes. I've done it before. Cisco studied the tactical display, then looked at Rogers. You're not Starfleet. I can't order you into this. You're not ordering me, Rogers said. I'm volunteering. Those are 3,000 people who deserve a chance. If we do nothing, they have none. The risks are enormous, Cisco said. If you're captured, the Dominion will interrogate you, learn about your origins, potentially use you as leverage. If you're killed, we lose a potential asset in this war. And if the mission fails, we've accomplished nothing except adding to the casualties. All true, Rogers agreed. But if we succeed, 3,000 people go home to their families. Isn't that what the Federation is supposed to be about? Protecting people, even when it's hard? Cisco was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to his crew. Tactical assessment. Can we make this work? Worf examined the convoy formation closely. If we strike first, targeting their command ship and communications relay, we could create a window of 7 to 9 minutes before they coordinate a response. In that time, Captain Rogers could potentially board a transport and disable its engines or shields. 7 to 9 minutes, Cisco repeated. Against 6 attack ships designed to kill vessels like ours. The Defiant has survived worse odds, Kira said quietly. And if we're not willing to take risks for prisoners of war, what are we fighting for? Dax nodded. I can pilot us through their formation, keep them off balance. And the cloaked shuttle gives us an advantage they won't expect. Cisco looked at each of his officers in turn, reading their resolve. Then he looked at Rogers. If we do this, you follow my commands exactly. No improvisation, no heroics beyond what the mission requires. Agreed? Agreed, Rogers said. Then we have 7 hours to plan this, Cisco said. Mr. Worf, run simulations. Chief, prepare a shuttle with cloaking capability. Dax, plot attack vectors. And someone find Captain Rogers a Starfleet comm badge. If he's going into combat with us, he needs to be able to communicate. The crew moved with purpose, the bridge suddenly alive with activity. Rogers felt a familiar sensation, the calm before action, the moment when planning crystallized into reality. Cisco stood, moving closer to Rogers. You asked to see what we fight for. Now you're fighting with us. I hope you know what you're getting into. I've fought impossible odds before, Rogers said. Usually turned out all right. Usually, Cisco echoed. Not always. No, Rogers admitted. Not always. Outside, the convoy continued its journey, unaware that in 7 hours, everything would change. Aboard one of the transports, 3,000 prisoners waited in darkness, not knowing if rescue would ever come. But it was coming. The shuttle bay was cold, utilitarian, smelling faintly of ozone and lubricant. Rogers stood beside a Type 9 shuttlecraft while Chief O'Brien made final adjustments to the cloaking emitter mounted beneath its hull. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its Romulan technology jury-rigged into Federation systems. She'll hold cloak for maybe 30 minutes, O'Brien said, wiping his hands on a rag. After that, the power drain becomes critical. You'll have to decloak or risk losing life support. 30 minutes, Rogers repeated. How long to reach the transport once we engage? 3 minutes at full impulse, O'Brien said. Which gives you 27 minutes to board, fight your way to engineering or the bridge, disable the ship, and get out before the Jem'Hadar realize what's happening. Rogers had infiltrated Nazi fortresses with less time and worse odds. I've worked with tighter windows. Worf approached, carrying equipment. Starfleet combat gear, he said, laying items on a nearby crate. Type 2 phaser, set to maximum stun. Tricorder for reading ship schematics. Combadge for communication. And this, he held up a small cylindrical device. Transport enhancer. Activate it when you're ready for extraction. It will cut through most interference. Rogers examined the phaser. It was lighter than expected, ergonomic, with a simple firing stud. Stun setting. What if that's not enough? Jem'Hadar physiology is resistant to stun, Worf admitted. But a direct hit will incapacitate them for 30 to 40 seconds. Aim for center mass. He paused. They feel no fear. They will not retreat. And they are bred for close combat. I won't, Rogers said. He strapped the phaser to his belt, testing the draw. Fast enough. He'd trained with every weapon imaginable. This would take adjustment, but the principle was the same. Point and fire. Kira entered the bay, her expression grim. Just got the updated sensor data. The lead transport has 60 Jem'Hadar soldiers aboard as guards. They're posted at key locations, bridge, engineering, detention areas. You'll be outnumbered the moment you board. 60 soldiers, Rogers said. Manageable. Kira raised an eyebrow. You're that confident. I'm that committed, Rogers corrected. There's a difference. He looked at the equipment laid out before him. Federation technology, alien weapons, a mission into hostile territory with no backup. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt familiar. During the war, I led a unit called the Howling Commandos. We ran operations behind enemy lines, sabotage, rescue, assassination when necessary. Most missions, we were outnumbered 10 to 1 or worse. We succeeded because we didn't fight fair. The Jem'Hadar don't fight fair either, Kira warned. They use shrouding devices to become invisible, hit-and-run tactics, and if they're losing, they'll detonate their own ships rather than be captured. They consider death in battle the highest honor. Rogers absorbed this. Fanatics, then. True believers in their cause, willing to die without hesitation. He'd faced similar enemies, SS officers who'd fought to the last man, kamikaze pilots who'd viewed their deaths as sacred duty. The tactics would be the same. Then I won't give them time to detonate anything. Sisko's voice came over the ship-wide comm, all hands, battle stations. We engage in 10 minutes. Captain Rogers, report to the shuttle bay for final briefing. I'm already here, Rogers said into his comm badge. Then stay put. I'm coming to you. Sisko arrived moments later, followed by Dax. The captain's expression was unreadable. But Rogers recognized the look, a commander about to send someone into almost certain danger, weighing the mission against the cost. Final mission parameters, Sisko said without preamble. The Defiant will decloak at maximum weapons range and engage the convoy escorts. Our target is the command ship, the lead Jem'Hadar attack vessel coordinating their formation. We hit it hard and fast with quantum torpedoes, disable its communications array, and force the remaining escorts to react defensively. Dax pulled up a tactical hologram. While they're focused on us, you'll launch in the cloaked shuttle and approach the second transport vessel, here. It's carrying the bulk of the prisoners and has the weakest shield configuration. Once you're in transporter range, you'll beam directly into their engineering section. Why engineering? Rogers asked. Because it's the least defended, Worf explained. Jem'Hadar guard prisoners in strategic locations, but they assume their shields prevent boarding. Engineering will have maybe 4 soldiers. Eliminate them, disable the warp core and impulse engines, and the ship becomes dead in space. Then what? Rogers asked. Then the convoy has a choice, Sisko said. They can stay and defend a disabled transport, which means we can call in reinforcements and mount a full rescue. Or they abandon it and retreat, which means we board at our leisure and free the prisoners. Either way, we win. It was sound strategy. Disable the ship, force a reaction, exploit the chaos. Rogers had used similar tactics dozens of times. What's my extraction plan? Once you've disabled the engines, activate your transport enhancer, Dax said. We'll beam you directly back to the Defiant. Total time aboard the transport should be 15 minutes maximum. And if something goes wrong? Rogers pressed. Sisko met his eyes. Then you do what soldiers do, adapt, survive, and complete the mission. I can't promise backup if the situation deteriorates. The Defiant's primary objective is to engage the escorts and keep them away from you. If we're destroyed, you'll be stranded on that transport with no support. Understood, Rogers said simply. Sisko studied him for a long moment. You don't have to do this. We could abort, report back to Starfleet Command, coordinate a proper rescue with fleet support. It would take longer, and we'd likely lose some of the prisoners, but you'd follow regulations, Rogers interrupted. File reports, get authorization, move through proper channels. And while you're doing that, 3,000 people suffer in Dominion custody. He shook his head. I've seen what happens when good people wait for permission to do the right thing. Sometimes you just have to act. That kind of thinking gets people killed, Kira said quietly. I know. I've lost friends who rushed in without thinking. I'm not rushing in, Rogers said. I'm calculating acceptable risk and deciding those prisoners are worth it. That's different. Sisko's expression softened slightly. You remind me of someone I used to be. Before I learned that command means living with the consequences of your decisions. He extended his hand. Good luck, Captain Rogers. Bring those people home. Rogers shook his hand firmly. That's the plan. As Sisko, Kira, and Worf left the bay, Dax lingered. She approached Rogers, her expression thoughtful. You know, I've lived 7 lifetimes. I've been a pilot, a gymnast, an ambassador, even a mother. And in all those lives, I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is care too much. She smiled slightly. But it's also the most important thing. Those prisoners are lucky you're stubborn. I'm not stubborn, Rogers said. I'm just. From Brooklyn? Dax finished, grinning. Jake mentioned you said that once. It's a good quality. We could use more Brooklyn around here. She headed for the exit, then paused. Oh, and Captain. When you're aboard that transport and things get bad, because they will, remember that we're out here fighting for you too. You're not alone. Then she was gone, leaving Rogers alone with the shuttle and his thoughts. He climbed into the pilot's seat, familiarizing himself with the controls. Federation interfaces were surprisingly intuitive: helm, navigation, tactical. O'Brien had preset the flight path, Rogers just needed to execute it. He tested the phaser, checking the charge. Full power. Enough for maybe 30 shots before needing to recharge. 30 shots. 60 Jem'Hadar soldiers. The math wasn't encouraging. Rogers closed his eyes, centering himself. He'd faced worse odds. Azano, when he'd rescued Bucky and 500 other POWs from a Hydra facility. Sokovia, fighting Ultron's endless drones. The moment he'd woken up 70 years in the future and had to decide whether to keep fighting or give up. He'd never given up. He wouldn't start now. Defiant to shuttle, Sisko's voice crackled over the comm, we're in position. Convoy is 300,000 kilometers ahead. Engaging in 60 seconds. Rogers opened his eyes, his hands moving to the controls. Copy that. Standing by for launch. Remember the mission parameters, Sisko said. Disable the ship, activate the transport enhancer, and get out. No heroics beyond what's necessary. Rogers allowed himself a small smile. Define necessary. There was a pause, then Sisko's voice carried a hint of amusement. Just don't get yourself killed, Captain. The paperwork would be terrible. I'll do my best. The countdown began. Rogers watched the tactical display as the Defiant moved into attack position. Through the shuttle's small viewport, he could see the Dominion convoy in the distance, 3 massive transports surrounded by their escort vessels, confident in their superiority. They had no idea what was coming. 10 seconds, Sisko announced. 9. 8. 7. Roger's hands tightened on the controls. 3. 2. 1. Engage. Space erupted in fire and light as the Defiant decloaked, quantum torpedoes screaming toward the lead Jem'Hadar ship. The explosions lit up the darkness like miniature suns, overwhelming the attack ship's shields in seconds. Go. Sisko ordered. Rogers launched the shuttle, punching the throttle to maximum. The small craft leapt forward, cloaking device activating as it cleared the Defiant's protective shields. On his sensors, Rogers watched the battle unfold, the remaining 5 escort ships breaking formation, converging on the Defiant with murderous intent. But the Defiant was already moving, Dax's piloting sending the warship into a tight corkscrew maneuver that evaded the incoming fire. Return fire lanced out, striking another Jem'Hadar vessel. Rogers focused on his own mission. The second transport loomed larger on his view screen, its shields glowing faintly as they maintained defensive power. 3 minutes at full impulse. He'd be there in 2. Behind him, the battle raged. Ahead, 3,000 prisoners waited. And somewhere between those 2 points, Steve Rogers prepared to do what he'd always done, fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The cloaked shuttle glided through the chaos of battle like a ghost. Rogers watched the tactical display as phaser fire and polaron beams crisscrossed the void behind him. The Defiant was holding its own, barely, against 5 Jem'Hadar attack ships that moved with coordinated precision. Dax's piloting was keeping them alive, but the shields were already down to 72%. The transport vessel filled his view screen. It was massive compared to the shuttle, easily 400 meters long, utilitarian design, weapons ports along its flanks. Rogers scanned for shield frequencies, found the rotating modulation pattern O'Brien had briefed him on. The transporter would need to match that frequency precisely or he'd be scattered across subspace. Defiant to Rogers, Sisko's voice was strained. "You're in position. 30 seconds to transport window." "Copy," Rogers said, his hands flying across the unfamiliar controls. The tricorder was already scanning the transport's interior, mapping corridors and compartments. Engineering section, Deck 4. For life signs, Jem'Hadar guards, just as Worf predicted. 20 seconds. Rogers stood, moving to the shuttle's small transporter pad. He checked his equipment one final time. Phaser, tricorder, transport enhancer, comm badge. His shield was strapped to his back. O'Brien had questioned bringing it, but Rogers had insisted. "Some things you didn't leave behind." 10 seconds. The transport's shields flickered, a momentary power fluctuation as they redirected energy to weapons. It was the opening he needed. "Initiating transport," Rogers said, activating the sequence O'Brien had programmed. The shuttle interior dissolved in a column of golden light. Rogers felt the familiar sensation of molecular disassembly, every atom of his body converted to energy, transmitted across space, then reassembled. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it was just another insertion method. He materialized in a dimly lit chamber filled with humming machinery. The warp core, a vertical column of pulsing energy, dominated the center of the room. Conduits and control panels lined the walls. And 4 Jem'Hadar soldiers turned toward him with reptilian speed. Rogers moved before they could raise their weapons. He drew his phaser mid-materialization, firing twice. The orange beam caught the nearest Jem'Hadar center mass, sending the soldier staggering. Not down, stunned, but still conscious, fighting through the neurological disruption. More resilient than expected. The second guard charged, moving with incredible speed. Rogers sidestepped, using the soldier's momentum against him. He swept the Jem'Hadar's legs, sending him crashing into a control panel. Sparks flew. Rogers fired again, point-blank into the soldier's back. This time, the Jem'Hadar collapsed. 2 down. 2 more closing in. The third soldier had his weapon up, a polaron rifle. Rogers threw himself behind the warp core as purple energy seared the air where he'd been standing. The beam hit a conduit, rupturing it. Superheated plasma vented into the room. Rogers came around the opposite side of the core, shield in hand. The fourth Jem'Hadar fired, his weapon's beam ricocheting off the vibranium surface with a metallic shriek. Rogers closed the distance in 3 strides, shield-checking the soldier with enough force to crack ribs. The Jem'Hadar flew backward, crashing through a railing. The third soldier swung his rifle like a club. Rogers blocked with his shield, then struck with his free hand, a precise blow to the throat that crushed the soldier's windpipe. The Jem'Hadar staggered, choking. Rogers fired the phaser, finally dropping him. The first soldier was recovering, shaking off the stun. Rogers didn't give him time. He threw the shield, a move he'd practiced 10,000 times, and watched it arc through the air with perfect spin. It struck the Jem'Hadar's head with a sickening crack. Then ricocheted back. Rogers caught it one-handed. Silence. For Jem'Hadar soldiers down in less than 30 seconds. Rogers keyed his comm badge. I'm in. Engineering secured. Good, Cisco's voice was tight. We've got problems up here. They're calling in reinforcements. You have 10 minutes, maybe less. Understood. Rogers moved to the engineering console, pulling out the tricorder. The interface was in a language he didn't recognize, Dominion Standard, probably, but O'Brien had given him the override codes. He entered them quickly, watching the display shift to Federation Standard. Warp core controls. Impulse engines. Power distribution. Rogers initiated the shutdown sequence for both propulsion systems. The warp core's pulsing slowed, its characteristic hum dropping in pitch. The deck plates vibrated differently as the impulse engines powered down. Within 90 seconds, the transport would be dead in space. An alarm shrieked. Red lighting flooded the engineering bay. Defiant, they know I'm here, Rogers said. We're reading it, Dax replied. Jem'Hadar are converging on your position from decks 3 and 5. At least 20 hostiles. 20. Rogers checked his phaser charge, 23 shots remaining. The math still wasn't good. I need to reach the detention areas. Free the prisoners before. Negative, Cisco cut him off. Your mission was to disable the ship. You've done that. Activate the transport enhancer and get out. Rogers looked at the engineering display. Deck 6, Section 12, that's where the prisoners were held, according to the layout. 2 decks down. Maybe 3 minutes if he ran. There are 3,000 people on this ship, Captain. And there are 6 Jem'Hadar attack ships out here trying to kill us, Cisco shot back. If we lose the Defiant, everyone dies. Including those prisoners. Extract now. That's an order. It was a reasonable order. A tactical order. The kind of order Rogers had given dozens of times when he'd commanded the Howling Commandos. Complete the objective, get out, live to fight another day. But those were 3,000 people. 3,000 Federation citizens who'd been captured, imprisoned, transported like cargo. If Rogers left now, they'd still be trapped when the Jem'Hadar regrouped. Still waiting for a rescue that might never come. Captain Rogers, Cisco's voice was hard. Do not make me regret trusting you. Rogers stood in the engineering bay, surrounded by disabled systems and unconscious Jem'Hadar, and made his choice. I'm sorry, Captain. But I didn't come here to disable a ship. I came here to save people. He deactivated his comm badge before Cisco could respond. The corridor outside engineering was narrow, lined with exposed conduits and harsh lighting. Rogers moved quickly but carefully, shield up, phaser ready. His enhanced hearing picked up footsteps, heavy boots on metal deck plates, coming from ahead. Multiple contacts. He ducked into a side corridor just as 6 Jem'Hadar soldiers rounded the corner. They moved in formation, weapons up, scanning for threats. Professional. Disciplined. Rogers waited until they passed, then stepped out behind them. He fired twice, dropping the rear guards before the others could react. The remaining 4 spun, weapons tracking. Rogers threw his shield again, the disc catching 2 soldiers across their chests. They went down hard. The last 2 opened fire simultaneously. Rogers' dove, rolled, came up firing. His first shot went wide. The second caught a Jem'Hadar in the shoulder, not enough. The soldier kept coming, closing the distance with frightening speed. Hand to hand, then. Rogers blocked the first strike with his forearm, feeling the impact even through his enhanced durability. The Jem'Hadar was strong, stronger than any normal human, comparable to Rogers himself. The second strike came fast, a knife hand aimed at his throat. Rogers parried, countered with a palm strike to the soldier's sternum. Bone cracked. The Jem'Hadar didn't slow. He grabbed Rogers' arm, attempting a throw. Rogers went with the momentum, using it to get inside the soldier's guard. He struck 3 times in rapid succession, ribs, solar plexus, jaw. The Jem'Hadar finally dropped. The 6th soldier was back on his feet, shield in hand, Rogers' shield. The Jem'Hadar examined it with cold curiosity, then hurled it back at Rogers with tremendous force. Rogers caught it, absorbing the kinetic energy. That's mine. The Jem'Hadar charged. Rogers met him head-on, shield raised. The collision was tremendous, 2 enhanced beings moving at combat speed, neither willing to yield. Rogers used his shield's edge, striking at vulnerable points. Knee. Elbow. Temple. The Jem'Hadar fought through each blow, his pain receptors apparently muted or non-existent. Finally, Rogers swept the soldier's legs and brought the shield's edge down on his head. The Jem'Hadar stopped moving. Rogers stood, breathing hard. 6 soldiers down. His phaser charge was at 17 shots. And he still had 2 decks to go. He found a service ladder leading down, descended quickly. Deck 5 was prisoner processing, empty cells, interrogation rooms, the detritus of Dominion occupation. No guards here. They'd all been redirected to stop the intruder. Deck 6. The detention area was ahead, a large compartment behind reinforced doors. Rogers could hear sounds beyond, voices, movement, the dull thud of despair. 3,000 people crammed into a space designed for cargo. The doors were locked, requiring command authorization. Rogers aimed his phaser at the control panel and fired. Overloading the circuits. The doors hissed open partially, enough to slip through. The sight that greeted him was worse than he'd imagined. Prisoners filled every available space, humans, Balians, Terrians, species he didn't recognize. They were thin, dirty, injured. Some lay motionless on the floor. Others stared at him with hollow eyes that had stopped hoping for rescue. A woman near the front, Starfleet uniform, commander's rank, struggled to stand. "Who are you?" "Steve Rogers," he said simply. "I'm here to get you out." The woman's eyes widened. "You're alone." "The USS Defiant is engaging the convoy escort," Rogers explained quickly. "This ship is disabled. Reinforcements are coming, but we need to be ready to evacuate when they arrive." "This ship has 60 Jem'Hadar guards," the commander said. "You've already encountered them?" "Some of them," Rogers admitted. "How many are left?" Before she could answer, weapons fire erupted from the corridor outside. Rogers spun, shield up. A squad of Jem'Hadar was approaching, at least 15 strong, firing as they advanced. Rogers returned fire, dropping 2 soldiers. But there were too many, and they were using suppressing fire tactics, keeping him pinned while they maneuvered. "Get everyone away from the doors." Rogers shouted to the commander. "Find cover." The prisoners scrambled back, panic spreading. Rogers held the doorway, using his shield to deflect incoming fire while shooting back with his phaser. He counted rounds, 12 shots left. 11. 10. A Jem'Hadar threw something, a grenade-like device. Rogers dove back through the doorway as the explosive detonated, tearing a hole in the bulkhead. Smoke filled the corridor. Through the haze, the Jem'Hadar advanced. Rogers keyed his comm badge, reactivating it. Defiant, I need emergency transport. Detention area, Deck 6. 3,000 prisoners and one very sorry super soldier. Steve Rogers fought his way through the transport ship's corridors with the grim efficiency of a man who'd done this before. Jem'Hadar's soldiers converged from every direction, drawn to him like iron to a magnet. That was fine. Every soldier focused on him was one less threatening the prisoners. He'd lost count of how many he'd taken down. 15. 20. His super soldier physiology was working overtime, cuts healing as fast as they appeared, bruised ribs mending between heartbeats, muscle tissue repairing itself through sheer biological efficiency. But even enhanced healing had limits, and he was approaching them. His comm badge crackled. Transport cycle 12 complete, Dax reported. 600 prisoners evacuated. We're taking heavy fire out here, Steve. The Defiant's shields are at 30%. Keep going, Roger said, deflecting a polaron beam with his shield. The impact sent shock waves up his arm. I'm still mobile. Barely, Sisko's voice cut in. We're reading your biosigns. You're injured, exhausted, and surrounded. It's time to pull you out. After the prisoners, Roger said. He rounded a corner, came face to face with 3 more Jem'Hadar. He didn't break stride, shield strike to the first, leg sweep to the second, elbow to the third's jaw. They went down, but more were coming. Always more. How many cycles left? 28, Dax said quietly. 28. Rogers did the math. At 2 minutes per cycle, that was 56 minutes. The Defiant's shields wouldn't last that long. He wouldn't last that long. A Jem'Hadar blade slashed across his back. Rogers spun, catching the soldier's wrist and breaking it with a sharp twist. Another soldier tackled him from the side, driving him into a bulkhead. Rogers felt ribs crack, they'd heal, but not immediately. He head-butted the Jem'Hadar, grabbed him by the armor, and threw him into 2 more soldiers advancing from the opposite direction. Captain Rogers, a new voice said over the comm. It was Worf. I am reading a Jem'Hadar battleship dropping out of warp. They are responding to the convoy's distress signal. ETA 3 minutes. A battleship. Not an attack ship, a full capital vessel with enough firepower to vaporize the Defiant in seconds. Rogers kept moving, kept fighting, mind racing through tactical options. Can you outrun it? Not while maintaining transporter lock on the prisoners, Cisco said. If we break off evacuation now, we can escape. But that leaves over 2,000 people still aboard. 2,000 people. Rogers thought of the faces he'd seen in that detention area, hollow-eyed, broken, but still hoping. If he'd learned anything from his time with the Avengers, from his decades of fighting, it was that hope mattered. Sometimes it was all that mattered. Don't break off, Rogers said. Complete the evacuation. That's a death sentence, Kira said flatly. For you and us. That battleship will obliterate this transport with you on it, then destroy the Defiant before we can jump to warp. Then we need to slow it down, Rogers said. An idea was forming, desperate, probably suicidal, but possible. Chief O'Brien, how's your knowledge of Dominion ship systems? Limited, O'Brien replied. But I'm reading what you're thinking in your biosigns, and it's insane. Is it possible? Rogers pressed. There was a pause. Theoretically. If you could reach the transport's bridge, access their communications array, and transmit a false all-clear signal on Dominion frequencies, you might convince the battleship to delay its approach. Maybe buy us 5-10 minutes. That's not enough time, Cisco said. It is if you speed up the transport cycles, Rogers said. Take more prisoners per beam. Overload the pattern buffers if you have to. That risks losing people in transit, Dax objected. Transporter accidents are better than guaranteed death when that battleship arrives, Rogers finished. Captain Sisko, I'm giving you a window. Use it. He didn't wait for Sisko's response. Rogers was already moving toward the nearest computer terminal, fighting through 2 more Jem'Hadar to reach it. He slammed one soldier's head into the console, dropped the other with a shield strike, then activated the interface. The layout was alien, but O'Brien was feeding him command sequences through his comm badge. Rogers' fingers flew across the controls, navigating menus he couldn't read by following O'Brien's precise instructions. Left menu, 3rd option down, O'Brien directed. Now the sub-command labeled with the double helix symbol. Rogers found it, selected it. Done. Now what? Now you need to transmit from the bridge. The communications array has to be manually activated from command stations. And the bridge is 8 decks up, Captain. 8 decks. Through corridors swarming with Jem'Hadar who now knew exactly where he was and what he was trying to do. Rogers looked at the terminal, then at the service ladder in the nearby corridor. How much time before the battleship arrives? 2 minutes, 30 seconds, Worf reported. Rogers ran. He took the ladder 3 rungs at a time, his enhanced muscles screaming in protest. Behind him, Jem'Hadar soldiers poured into the shaft, firing upward. Polaron beams scorched the walls around him. Rogers didn't look back, looking back was dying. Deck 5. Deck 4. He could hear soldiers on the decks above, moving to cut him off. They were coordinating, trying to trap him between 2 forces. Rogers reached Deck 3, burst through the access door into a corridor filled with waiting Jem'Hadar. He threw his shield ahead of him, the Vibranium disc striking 3 soldiers before ricocheting off a bulkhead and returning to his hand. The path was clear for exactly 2 seconds. Rogers used them, sprinting through the gap before the soldiers could recover. His comm badge crackled. Transport cycle 20 complete, Dax said. Her voice was strained. 1,000 prisoners evacuated. Defiant shields at 18%. That battleship is charging weapons. How long? Rogers gasped, still running. 90 seconds to firing range. Not enough time. He'd never reach the bridge, transmit the signal, and complete the evacuation in 90 seconds. The mission was failing. 3,000 people, 1,000 saved, 2,000 still trapped. Better than nothing. Better than. No. Rogers had spent 70 years frozen in ice rather than accept defeat. He'd fought gods, aliens, and his own government when it was wrong. He'd stood alone against impossible odds because someone had to. Because that's what you did when people needed you. He'd be damned if he'd accept failure now. Rogers reached a junction, saw a maintenance shaft leading directly up through decks 2 and 1. It was narrow, barely large enough for a human body, meant for repairs not combat. He didn't hesitate. He jumped, grabbed the internal ladder, and pulled himself up with desperate strength. Jem'Hadar soldiers crowded the shaft below, firing upward. Energy beams scorched past Rogers' legs. One caught his calf, burning through uniform and flesh. He kept climbing. Deck 2. The shaft opened onto a corridor. Rogers hauled himself out, landing hard on deck plating. The bridge was ahead, 20 meters, a straight shot. Between him and it stood the Jem'Hadar first, the commander who'd hailed DS-9 demanding Rogers' surrender. Ika stood 2 meters tall, armored, carrying a massive blade that looked capable of cleaving a man in half. His reptilian eyes fixed on Rogers with cold recognition. "You are the anomaly," Ika said. "The Founders want you alive. But I will settle for your corpse." "Get in line," Rogers said, raising his shield. They closed the distance simultaneously. Ika's blade came down in a devastating arc. Rogers caught it on his shield, the impact driving him to one knee. The Jem'Hadar was stronger than the others, a true warrior, enhanced even beyond his species' baseline. Ika struck again, a horizontal slash aimed at Rogers' neck. Rogers ducked, rolled under the blow, came up inside the Jem'Hadar's guard. He struck with the shield's edge, targeting joints and pressure points. Ika absorbed the hits, barely flinching. 60 seconds, Worf's voice was quiet over the comm, "The battleship is targeting this vessel." Rogers blocked another strike, feeling the vibration through his entire body. Ika was skilled, patient, wearing him down with superior reach and strength. Rogers' enhanced healing was slowing, too many injuries, too much damage, his body finally reaching its limit. He needed to end this. Now. Rogers feinted left, drew Ika's blade out of position, then threw his entire body weight into a shield charge. The Vibranium disc struck Ika's chest with tremendous force, driving the Jem'Hadar backward through the bridge doors. They crashed onto the command deck together. Rogers rolled to his feet, spotted the communications console, lurched toward it. Behind him, Ika was rising, blade still in hand. 30 seconds, Dax said. "Steve, if you're going to do something." Rogers reached the console, activated it with commands O'Brien fed him. The communications array lit up, transmitting on Dominion frequencies. He input the false all-clear signal, telling the battleship the situation was contained, reinforcements unnecessary. Signal transmitted, O'Brien confirmed. "The battleship is slowing. They're holding position." It worked. Ika's blade pierced Rogers' shoulder from behind, driving through muscle and bone. Rogers gasped, pain overwhelming his enhanced nervous system. The Jem'Hadar twisted the blade. "You fight well, anomaly," Ika said. "But you are not Jem'Hadar. You do not understand victory through death." Rogers grabbed the blade with his free hand, feeling it cut into his palm. Blood ran down his arm. "You're right," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't understand victory through death." He pulled himself forward along the blade's length, driving himself closer to Ika. "I understand victory through not giving up." He head-butted the Jem'Hadar, grabbed him by the armor, and threw him across the bridge into the view screen. The screen shattered. Ika collapsed among the sparking wreckage. Rogers pulled the blade from his shoulder with a sickening wet sound. His vision swam. Blood loss. Exhaustion. His healing factor was barely keeping him conscious. "Transport cycle 38 complete," Dax said, her voice seeming to come from very far away. 2,900 prisoners evacuated. "Steve, we're reading critical biosigns. We're beaming you out now." "The last prisoners first," Rogers said. His voice sounded weak even to himself. "Negative," Cisco said firmly. "Chief, lock onto Captain Rogers and—" "Transport cycle 40 complete," Dax interrupted. "All prisoners evacuated. Everyone's out, Steve. Mission accomplished." Rogers felt his legs give out. He collapsed against the communications console, the blade falling from nerveless fingers. Through the broken view screen, he could see the defiant, scarred, shields flickering, but intact. Behind it, prisoner-filled cargo bays. 3,000 lives saved. Worth it, he thought. Golden light enveloped him as the transporter beam locked on. The last thing Rogers saw before the bridge dissolved was Ika stirring among the wreckage, reaching for his weapon. Then he was on the Defiant, in the transporter room, Dr. Bashir already moving toward him with a medical tricorder and hypospray. Cisco stood nearby, his expression unreadable. "You disobeyed a direct order," Cisco said. "Yes sir," Rogers said. Then he passed out. Steve Rogers woke to the steady hum of medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of the Defiant sickbay. His shoulder throbbed with a dull, manageable ache, manageable being relative when you've been impaled by an alien blade. He opened his eyes, found Dr. Bashir standing over him with a medical tricorder. "Welcome back," Bashir said, relief evident in his voice. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Your enhanced healing factor is remarkable, but even you need recovery time after that level of trauma." Rogers sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. The wound was closed, tender but functional. "The prisoners?" "All 3,000 safely aboard DS-9, Bashir said. "We transferred them during the trip back. Starfleet Medical is processing them now, injuries, malnutrition, psychological trauma. It'll take weeks to get them all home, but they're alive." He paused. "Because of you." Rogers swung his legs off the biobed. His uniform was gone, replaced by a standard-issue medical gown. "Where's Captain Sisko?" "Bridge. We're approaching the station now." Bashir handed him a fresh Starfleet uniform, not his own gear, but close enough. "He said to send you up when you woke. Though I'd prefer you rest another 12 hours. "I've rested enough," Rogers said, taking the uniform. "Thank you, Doctor." Minutes later, Rogers stepped onto the Defiance bridge. The crew was at their stations, Worf at tactical, Dax at helm, O'Brien monitoring engineering. Cisco sat in the command chair, studying a damage report PADD. He looked up as Rogers entered. "Captain Rogers," Cisco said formally. "Feeling better?" "Good enough," Rogers replied. The bridge was quiet, tension thick enough to cut. "I know we need to talk about what happened." "We do," Cisco agreed. He stood, gestured toward the ready room. "In private." The ready room was small, a desk, a few chairs, a viewport showing DS-9 growing larger as they approached. Cisco closed the door, then turned to face Rogers. His expression was controlled, but Rogers recognized anger when he saw it. "You disobeyed a direct order during a combat operation," Cisco said without preamble. "I told you to extract after disabling the transport. Instead, you went deeper into enemy territory, engaged superior forces, and nearly got yourself killed. Do you understand how close we came to losing everything? The Defiant, the prisoners, you, all of it." "I understand," Rogers said quietly. "And I'm sorry for putting your crew at risk. That wasn't my intention." "Your intention was to save every prisoner on that ship," Cisco said. "Noble. Admirable. And tactically insane. Wars aren't won by individual acts of heroism, Captain. They're won by coordinated strategy, following orders, trusting your command structure." "I know that," Rogers said. "I've commanded soldiers. I've given those same orders. But I've also learned that sometimes the mission parameters are wrong. Sometimes you see an opportunity that wasn't in the plan, and you have to take it. Or sometimes you see what you want to see," Cisco countered. "You wanted to save everyone, so you convinced yourself it was possible. That's not tactical thinking. That's emotional decision-making in combat. It gets people killed." Rogers met his eyes steadily. "And this time it didn't. This time, 3,000 people who were heading to labor camps or execution are going home to their families. I understand I broke protocol. I understand I risked your ship and your crew. But I'd make the same choice again." Cisco was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more complex. "That's what terrifies me about you, Captain Rogers. You're so certain of your principles that you'll sacrifice everything for them. Including your own life. Including the lives of people who depend on you." He moved to the viewport, staring at DS-9. "I've met people like you before. They don't usually survive long in war. Maybe, Rogers acknowledged. But I'd rather die standing by my principles than live having abandoned them. That's not self-righteousness, Captain. It's just who I am. I can't be anything else. Sisko turned back to him. During the mission, when you deactivated your comm badge and went after the prisoners, do you know what I thought? Rogers shook his head. I thought, here's a man who understands what the Federation is supposed to be better than most of us who wear the uniform, Sisko said. You've been in this universe less than a week, and you already grasped something that took me years to learn, that our principles only matter when they're difficult to uphold. He sat on the edge of his desk. But I also thought, here's a man who'll get himself killed by those same principles. Because believing everyone can be saved is a beautiful ideal. But war doesn't care about ideals. War is mathematics. Resources versus objectives. Lives saved versus lives risked. And sometimes the equation doesn't balance. I know, Rogers said. I've done that math more times than I can count. I've left people behind. I've made impossible choices. But this time, this specific time, the math worked. We saved them all. Because you got lucky, Sisko said flatly. That battleship could have ignored your signal. The Jem'Hadar could have killed you before you reached the bridge. The Defiance shields could have failed. Any one of a dozen variables goes differently, and we're having a very different conversation. If we're having one at all. You're right, Rogers admitted. I got lucky. But I also gave those prisoners a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. Isn't that worth something? Sisko rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. When I took command of DS9, I thought I understood warfare. I'd fought the Cardassians, studied military history, believed I knew what it took to win. Then the Dominion War started, and I learned that winning sometimes means losing pieces of yourself. I've made decisions that haunt me. Compromised principles I thought were absolute. Become someone I'm not sure I recognize anymore. He looked at Rogers. And then you show up, this soldier from another universe who still believes in absolute moral clarity. Who'll throw himself into impossible situations because it's the right thing to do. Part of me admires that. Part of me envies it. And part of me is terrified by what it means. What does it mean? Rogers asked. It means you're going to keep making these choices, Sisko said. You're going to keep putting yourself in harm's way, keep challenging orders when they conflict with your conscience. And eventually, your luck will run out. You'll end up dead, or worse, you'll survive but get people you care about killed instead. Rogers was quiet, absorbing that. It wasn't wrong. He'd lost people, Bucky, falling from the train. Teammates who'd trusted his judgment. Friends who'd followed him into battles they didn't walk away from. The cost of his principles wasn't just paid by him. I can't promise I won't make the same choices again, Rogers said finally. I can't promise I'll always follow orders. But I can promise I'll never take those choices lightly. Every time I break protocol, every time I risk lives to save others, I'll carry the weight of that decision. That's all I can offer. Sisko studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then I suppose that's enough. Welcome to the war, Captain Rogers. You've earned your place in it. Rogers shook his hand. Does this mean I'm not court-martialed? A slight smile crossed Sisko's face. You're not Starfleet, so I can't court-martial you. Which is probably fortunate for both of us. But if you're going to fight alongside us, we need ground rules. You can question orders, but not during combat operations. You can disagree with strategy, but not after engagement begins. And you never, disable your comm badge again. If you're in trouble, we need to know. Understood? Understood, Rogers said. Good. Sisko moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Captain, I'm glad you were stubborn. Those 3,000 people and their families are glad too. Sometimes the right choice and the smart choice aren't the same thing. Today, you proved they can be. They returned to the bridge as the Defiant was docking at DS9. Through the viewports, Rogers could see the station bustling with activity, medical ships ferrying the rescued prisoners, Starfleet vessels on patrol, the wormhole pulsing with its alien light. "Captain," Worf said, looking up from his console. "Priority message from Starfleet Command. Admiral Ross wants a full debrief on the rescue operation." "Tell the Admiral we'll have a report within 12 hours, Cisco said. He glanced at Rogers. "A report that will emphasize the mission's success and minimize the creative interpretations of orders." "Appreciated," Rogers said. "Don't thank me yet," Cisco replied. "Ross is going to want to meet you. So is Starfleet Intelligence. And probably half a dozen other agencies who want to understand what you are and where you came from. You're about to become very popular." "I've dealt with government agencies before," Rogers said dryly. "Usually doesn't end well." Kira approached, a PADD in hand. "Captain Rogers, the rescued prisoners want to thank you personally. There's a gathering on the promenade in 2 hours. You don't have to attend, but..." "I'll be there," Rogers said immediately. As the Defiant completed docking procedures, Rogers stood at the viewport, looking out at Deep Space Nine. A week ago, he'd been pulled from his universe into this one, confused, suspicious, uncertain about these people and their war. Now he'd fought alongside them. Bled with them. Saved lives with them. This wasn't his war. This wasn't his time. But these were people worth fighting for. That much he knew for certain. "Captain Rogers," Dax said, approaching with a smile. "I've been analyzing the sensor data from your fight with that Jem'Hadar first. Your combat effectiveness under stress is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it." "That's the super soldier serum," Rogers explained. "Enhanced physiology, accelerated healing, peak human." "It's not just the enhancements," Dax interrupted. "It's how you use them. Your tactical thinking, your ability to adapt to unknown technology and alien opponents. You're not just an enhanced human. You're a natural warrior." Rogers wasn't sure how to respond to that. He'd never thought of himself as a warrior, just a soldier who did what was necessary. "Speaking of which," O'Brien said, joining the conversation. "That shield of yours held up remarkably well. I'd love to run some metallurgical analysis, understand how Vibranium works at the quantum level." "Chief," Rogers said gently. "I appreciate the interest, but the shield stays with me. No analysis, no scans beyond basic safety checks. It's important." O'Brien looked disappointed but nodded. "Fair enough. Though if you ever change your mind, I've got some ideas about how we could incorporate Vibranium into Federation armor systems." The docking procedure completed. Cisco stood, addressing his crew. "Good work, everyone. We pulled off a mission that shouldn't have succeeded. Get some rest. We'll debrief tomorrow morning." He looked at Rogers. "That includes you, Captain. You're going to need your strength. This war is just getting started." 2 hours later, Rogers stood on the promenade, surrounded by freed prisoners. They came in waves, humans, aliens, families, soldiers, all wanting to shake his hand, express gratitude, share their stories. A human woman, maybe 30, held a small child. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'd given up hope. Then you appeared, and suddenly we had a chance." A Bolian engineer, still bearing scars from captivity, gripped Rogers' hand firmly. "I don't know where you came from, stranger. But I'm grateful you're here." Again and again, the same sentiment. Gratitude. Hope. Relief. Jake Cisco was documenting it all, his recording device capturing testimonials. He caught Rogers' eye, nodded respectfully. This was history being written in real time. Quark, the Ferengi bartender, approached with a glass of something amber. "On the house," he said. "For the hero of the hour. Though between you and me, Captain, heroism is bad for business. Dead heroes don't buy drinks." Rogers accepted the glass, took a sip. It burned going down, some kind of alcohol far stronger than anything from his era. "I'll try to stay alive, then. For business purposes." Quark grinned. "See that you do. The station needs more people willing to throw themselves at impossible odds. Makes the rest of us look bad." As the crowd continued, Rogers noticed Odo watching from his usual perch, observing, evaluating, his shapeshifter nature evident in the unnatural stillness of his form. Their eyes met briefly. Odo nodded once, not approval, exactly, but acknowledgement. A fellow being who understood justice through action. The gathering lasted hours. By the end, Rogers' hand ached from handshakes, his voice was hoarse from conversation, and his enhanced body was finally demanding rest it couldn't be denied. He found his quarters, collapsed onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was planning its next move. The war continued. And he'd committed himself to fighting it. Steve Rogers had been asleep for 70 years, frozen in ice. He'd woken to a world that had moved on without him, fought alongside gods and super soldiers, and learned to find purpose in an unfamiliar future. Now he'd been thrown into another universe entirely. Another war. Another chance to stand for something. And despite everything, the pain, the uncertainty, the danger, he found himself almost grateful. Because a soldier without a war to fight was just a man waiting to become obsolete. And Steve Rogers refused to be obsolete. 3 days after the rescue mission, Rogers stood in Deep Space Nine's wardroom facing a holocommunicator displaying Admiral William Ross, a stern-faced man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades making impossible decisions. Beside Rogers stood Captain Sisko, arms clasped behind his back. "Captain Rogers," Ross said, his image flickering slightly from subspace interference. "I've read Commander Sisko's report. 3,000 prisoners rescued, minimal casualties, 1 disabled Dominion transport and significant intelligence gathered on their convoy routes. By any measure, a successful operation." "Thank you, Admiral," Rogers said carefully. He'd dealt with enough military brass to know when the other shoe was about to drop. However, Ross continued, "I'm also reading reports of insubordination, unauthorized tactical deviations, and reckless endangerment of a valuable Starfleet asset. Captain Sisko has vouched for your actions, but Starfleet Command has concerns about integrating an unknown operative into our strategic operations." "With respect, Admiral, I'm not asking to be integrated," Rogers said. "I didn't choose to come here. I was pulled into your universe by forces I don't understand. But while I'm here, I won't stand by while people suffer." Ross studied him through the view screen. "Commander Sisko tells me you come from a military background. That you led special operations behind enemy lines during Earth's Second World War. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir," Rogers confirmed. "Then you understand chain of command. You understand that wars are won through coordination, not individual heroics. Yet your first combat operation with us involved deliberately disobeying orders." Rogers glanced at Sisko, who remained impassive. "I understand your concern, Admiral. But I'm not Starfleet. I never claimed to be. Captain Sisko brought me along as an observer. What I observed was 3,000 people who needed help. I provided it. Using Starfleet resources and putting a Starfleet crew at risk," Ross countered. "A risk they accepted," Rogers said. "Captain Sisko could have extracted me at any time. He chose to support the mission because it was the right thing to do. That speaks well of your Federation, Admiral. It suggests your principles aren't just rhetoric." Ross's expression was unreadable. "You're very certain of yourself, Captain Rogers." "I'm certain of what I believe in," Rogers corrected. I've seen what happens when good people compromise their principles for convenience. I've seen governments that claim to stand for freedom while trampling it. I won't be part of that. Not here, not anywhere. Silence stretched across the subspace channel. Finally, Ross spoke. Starfleet Command has authorized a provisional arrangement. You'll be assigned to Deep Space Nine as a special tactical consultant, civilian status, no rank, no formal chain of command. You'll provide combat expertise and participate in operations at Captain Sisko's discretion. But you will not have access to classified intelligence, you will not command Starfleet personnel, and you will be monitored. Monitored, Rogers repeated. By me, Cisco said quietly. Starfleet wants regular reports on your activities, capabilities, and any potential security risks you might pose. It's standard protocol for unknown elements during wartime. Rogers understood. They didn't trust him, not completely. Fair enough. He didn't completely trust them either. I can accept those terms. As long as I'm free to make my own choices. Within reason, Ross said. Captain Sisko has final authority on DS9. If he determines you're a threat to station security or Federation interests, you'll be detained. Clear. Crystal, Rogers said. Ross nodded. Then welcome to the war effort, Captain Rogers. I hope you'll prove my concerns unfounded. The transmission ended, leaving Rogers and Cisco alone in the wardroom. Well, Rogers said. That could have gone worse. Much worse, Cisco agreed. Ross wanted you confined to quarters under guard until Starfleet intelligence could conduct a full investigation. I convinced him you were more valuable in the field. He moved to the window overlooking the promenade. Don't make me regret that decision. I'll do my best, Rogers said. He hesitated, then asked, why did you vouch for me? You barely know me. Cisco was quiet for a moment. Because in 3 days, you've shown more genuine commitment to Federation ideals than some officers I've served with for years. You didn't ask what regulations permitted or what orders authorized. You saw people who needed help, and you helped them. That's supposed to be what we're about. He turned to face Rogers. But I also vouched for you because I think you're going to challenge us. Question our decisions. Force us to examine whether we're still fighting for the right reasons. We need that. Especially now. What do you mean? Cisco gestured toward the viewport. Beyond DS9, space seemed peaceful, stars twinkling, the wormhole pulsing gently. But Rogers knew better. Out there, fleets were moving, battles were being fought, people were dying. This war has been going on for 2 years. We've lost hundreds of ships, thousands of lives. And the longer it continues, the easier it becomes to justify compromises. Section 31, the organization I told you about, wants to develop a biological weapon targeting the Founders. They argue it would end the war quickly, save Federation lives. Genocide, Rogers said flatly. Targeted elimination of enemy leadership, Cisco corrected, though his tone suggested he didn't believe the distinction mattered. I've argued against it. But there are officers, good officers, who support it. They're tired. They've lost friends, family. They want the war to end, whatever the cost. Rogers understood that exhaustion. He'd felt it himself, the bone-deep weariness that came from fighting too long, losing too much. What do you want from me? I want you to be the person who reminds us what we're fighting for, Cisco said simply. Not because you're naive about war's realities. But because you understand that losing your principles is worse than losing battles. Can you do that? Rogers thought about it. About the soldiers he'd led, the choices he'd made, the compromises he'd rejected even when they would have been easier. I can try. But Captain, if I see your Federation becoming the thing it claims to oppose, I won't stay silent. Even if that means opposing you. I wouldn't expect anything less, Cisco said. He extended his hand. Welcome to Deep Space Nine, Captain Rogers. I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. That evening, Rogers found himself at Quark's bar, nursing another glass of the Ferengi's potent alcohol. The promenade was quieter now, late shift, most personnel either on duty or resting. A few die-hard gamblers clustered around the Debo table. Morn, a silent Lurian regular, occupied his customary bar stool. "You're brooding," a voice said. Rogers looked up to find Jadzia Dax sliding onto the stool beside him. "I've had 7 lifetimes to recognize brooding when I see it." "Just thinking," Rogers said. "About whether you made the right choice?" Dax asked. "Staying here, fighting our war." "About whether I have a choice," Rogers admitted. "I can't get home. The method that brought me here, whatever it was, I don't understand it. Your scientists don't understand it. So I'm stuck." "Stuck," Dax repeated. "Or given an opportunity?" Rogers raised an eyebrow. "You told me you came from a time where you'd been frozen for 70 years, Dax said. "Woke up in a future that had moved on without you. Now you're in another universe entirely, fighting another war. Most people would be paralyzed by that. But you've adapted faster than anyone I've ever seen. Almost like you're used to it." "I've had practice being the man out of time," Rogers said quietly. "Doesn't mean I like it." "No," Dax agreed. "But maybe it means you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The universe has a way of putting people where they're needed, even if we don't understand why." Rogers considered that. In his experience, the universe was random, chaos masquerading as pattern. But then again, he'd been frozen in ice for 7 decades and survived. He'd been pulled across dimensional boundaries and landed on a space station fighting for freedom against authoritarian oppression. If that wasn't meaningful, it was one hell of a coincidence. "The prophets would say this was meant to be," Dax continued. "That you were brought here for a purpose. I'm not Bajoran, so I don't worship them. But I've learned to respect that sometimes things happen for reasons we can't see yet." "You're saying I should embrace this," Rogers said. "I'm saying you're already embracing it," Dax corrected. "You risked your life for 3,000 people you'd never met. You challenged a Starfleet captain during combat operations because you saw a better way. You're not waiting to get home, Steve. You're building a life here." Rogers looked at his reflection in the glass. Dax was right. He'd committed, not consciously, but through action. The moment he'd chosen to save those prisoners, he'd chosen this war. This universe. These people. "So what now?" he asked. "Now you become part of the crew," Dax said with a smile. "Train with Worf, he's been dying to spar with someone who might actually challenge him. Help O'Brien with engineering projects, he loves having someone who appreciates good old-fashioned problem-solving. Attend Kira's tactical briefings. And maybe, if you're feeling social, join us for holosuit programs. We run everything from Arthurian adventures to baseball games." "Baseball," Rogers said. "I haven't played baseball since 1943. "Then you're in luck," Dax said. "Benjamin's passionate about it. Managed to teach a bunch of aliens who'd never heard of it. I think you'll fit right in." Across the bar, Quark was arguing with a customer about payment. Odo materialized from a liquid state, resuming humanoid form to investigate a minor disturbance. Starfleet officers laughed at a nearby table, momentarily forgetting the war. Life continued, even on the edge of oblivion. Rogers finished his drink. "All right. I'll stay. I'll fight. But on my terms, I won't become something I'm not just because it's convenient." "Wouldn't want you any other way," Dax said. She stood, patted his shoulder. "Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow, Worf wants to test your combat skills in the holosuit. Something about Klingon warrior traditions and worthy opponents. Should be entertaining." After she left, Rogers sat alone with his thoughts. The bar's ambient noise washed over him, conversations in a dozen languages, the clatter of gambling, the hum of the station systems. It was alien and familiar simultaneously. He thought about Bucky, about the Howling Commandos, about everyone he'd left behind in his own universe. Were they looking for him? Did they think he was dead? Or had time moved differently there, had seconds passed while he'd been gone days? No way to know. No way home. So forward was the only direction that mattered. Rogers stood, dropped payment on the bar. Quark had explained the station's currency system, though it still felt absurd, and headed for his quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Training with Worf. Tactical meetings. Probably more situations where his principles clashed with expedient solutions. He'd face them the same way he'd faced everything else, by staying true to who he was. Even if that meant standing alone. Even if that meant fighting forever. Because Steve Rogers had learned long ago that some things were worth dying for. And freedom, the right of people to choose their own path, to live without tyranny, to resist oppression, was at the top of that list. This universe needed fighters. Needed people willing to stand up and say no when everyone else was compromising. Fine. He'd be that person. Again. As the doors to his quarters closed behind him, Steve Rogers looked out at the alien stars and made a silent promise, not to the Federation, not to Starfleet, but to himself. He would fight this war. He would protect the innocent. He would challenge authority when it was wrong and support it when it was right. He would be the same man he'd always been, regardless of what universe he found himself in. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Outside, the wormhole pulsed with otherworldly light. Deep Space Nine continued its eternal vigil. The Dominion War raged on. And Captain America had found his place in it. The weeks that followed transformed Steve Rogers from an anomaly into an integral part of Deep Space Nine's defense. He trained with Worf, learning Klingon combat techniques while teaching hand-to-hand tactics the Empire had never encountered. He worked alongside O'Brien, his practical problem-solving from 1940s engineering surprisingly applicable to 24th century systems. He joined Cisco's senior staff meetings, offering perspectives that challenged conventional Starfleet thinking. But more than that, he became a symbol. The rescued prisoners spread stories of the soldier from another universe who'd refused to leave anyone behind. Starfleet personnel who'd grown weary of compromise found themselves questioning whether expedience had become their default. Even Section 31, watching from the shadows, recognized that Captain America represented something dangerous to their utilitarian calculus, proof that principles could coexist with victory. Rogers didn't seek that role. He simply lived according to the values he'd carried across universes and decades. When Cisco faced another impossible choice, whether to sacrifice a colony to protect a strategic position, Rogers asked the questions no one else would. When Kira struggled with the ghosts of her resistance past, he shared his own experience with moral injury. When young officers wondered if the war would consume their souls, he reminded them that holding on to your humanity was the point. The Dominion learned to fear him. Intelligence reports identified the Earth anomaly as a priority target, a human who fought like a Jem'Hadar but refused to accept their certainty of victory through death. The founders couldn't comprehend someone who embodied both warrior efficiency and absolute moral conviction. To them, such beings were contradictions. To Rogers, they were simply what soldiers should be. As he stood on the promenade one evening, watching Bajorans pray and Ferengi bargain and Starfleet officers laugh, Rogers realized something profound. He'd spent 70 years frozen, then woken to find his world transformed. Now he'd been thrown across dimensions into an alien war. By any measure, he should have been lost, broken, overwhelmed. Instead, he'd found purpose. Because the universe he came from and the universe he now inhabited shared one fundamental truth: freedom required eternal vigilance. Justice demanded action, not rhetoric. And sometimes, one person standing for what was right could inspire others to do the same. Steve Rogers didn't know if he'd ever return home. Didn't know if the phenomenon that brought him here could be reversed or understood. But standing on Deep Space Nine, watching people of 100 worlds coexist despite their differences, fighting together against tyranny, he realized something surprising. He'd found his place among the stars. Not as Captain America. Not as a relic from another time. But as a soldier who understood that some battles transcended universes. That the fight for freedom, for the right of all beings to determine their own futures, was worth fighting anywhere, anytime, at any cost. The wormhole pulsed beyond the viewport, its alien light reflecting off the station's hull. Somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant, the Dominion plotted. Somewhere in Federation space, officers made difficult choices. And somewhere between those points, Steve Rogers prepared for the next mission, the next impossible situation, the next chance to prove that principles and pragmatism weren't opposites. The war would continue. People would be tested. Compromises would be offered and sometimes accepted. But as long as Captain America stood on Deep Space Nine, there would be at least one voice asking the hard questions. One soldier refusing to accept that victory required abandoning what made victory worthwhile. One man proving that even in the darkest times, even across universes, some truths remained absolute. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more amazing stories.